Suzanne Mertzizen, the radio operator who transmitted messages under the Nazis' nose, April 26, 1944. 11:45 p.m. Paris, occupied France. The rain is a relentless, freezing sheet hammering against the glass of a blacked-out attic skylight. Inside, the air is suffocating, smelling of damp timber, dust, and the sharp, metallic tang of ozone. Suzanne Mertzizen sits on a splintered wooden crate. She is 24 years old. In front of her, glowing with a faint, amber warmth in the absolute. Darkness is a Type 3 Mark II clandestine radio set. She is wearing heavy bakelite headphones. Her fingers rest lightly on the brass Morse key. She's not just tapping a button. She is holding the lifeline of the French resistance in her hands. 3 streets away, moving with predatory slowness, is a gray German van. Mounted on its roof is a rotating wooden hoop. It is a Peilwagen, a Gestapo radio direction-finding vehicle, colloquially known as a Gonio. Inside the van, German technicians watch a glowing cathode ray tube. They are hunting the invisible waves radiating from Suzanne's attic. They are hunting her. Suzanne knows the mathematics of survival. A clandestine radio operator, known in the underground as a pianist, has a maximum of 15 minutes to transmit before the German goniometers can triangulate their exact location. She checks her watch. 12 minutes have passed. Through the static in her headphones, she hears the operator in London acknowledge the first half of her encrypted message. It is a vital request for weapons to be dropped to a Maquis unit in the countryside, but the message is long. It requires another 80 groups of ciphered letters. She can stop now. She can pack the 30-pound radio into its leather suitcase, climb down the fire escape, and vanish into the Parisian night. She would live to transmit another day. But if she stops, the Maquis fighters waiting in the freezing forests of the Vercors will not receive their ammunition. When the German armor arrives, they will be slaughtered. Suzanne does not reach for the power switch. She tightens her grip on the Morse key. Her fingers fly across the brass, tapping out the cipher at 20 words per minute. She is buying the resistance bullets with the seconds of her own life. She decides to push it to 16 minutes. To understand the terrifying, isolated war of the radio operator, you must understand the woman who volunteered for the most dangerous job in occupied Europe. Suzanne Camille Boite was born on May 15, 1919, in Colombes, a suburb of Paris. She grew up in a France that was still deeply scarred by the trenches of the First World War. She was intelligent, fiercely observant, and possessed a quiet, unshakable resolve. Before the world caught fire, she married a man named Mertzizen and eventually found herself living across the Mediterranean in Algiers, North Africa. In May 1940, the French Republic collapsed under the treads of the German Blitzkrieg. The occupation cast a long, suffocating shadow, even reaching the colonies in North Africa under the collaborationist Vichy regime. But in November 1942, the tides of war violently shifted. The Allies launched Operation Torch, landing massive American and British forces on the shores of Morocco and Algeria. North Africa was suddenly liberated, becoming the staging ground for the reconquest of Europe. For Suzanne, watching the Allied tanks roll through the streets of Algiers was not enough. She did not want to be a spectator to her country's liberation. She wanted to be the tip of the spear. The opportunity arrived in the form of a groundbreaking military initiative. The French army, historically an exclusively male institution, was suffering from a massive manpower shortage. General Henri Giraud and Colonel Edouard Merlin realized that modern warfare required immense logistical and communication networks. In early PAL 1943, they created the Corps Féminin de Transmission, Women's Signal Corps. The volunteers were affectionately and somewhat patronizingly nicknamed the Merlinettes. Suzanne enlisted immediately. She was joined by other young, fiercely patriotic women, including Eugénie Gendy, Pierrette Louin, and Marie-Louise Cloarec. They were among the very first female soldiers in the history of the French regular army. The training in Algiers was brutally rigorous. The women were not taught to be switchboard operators in safe, rear echelon headquarters. They were trained for clandestine infiltration. Suzanne learned the arcane, complex language of Morse code until it became muscle memory. She learned how to encrypt and decrypt messages using highly secure, randomized one-time pads. She was taught how to repair a shattered radio tube, how to construct an improvised antenna from household wire, and how to spot a Gestapo tail on a crowded street. Most importantly, her instructors drilled into her the grim statistics of her chosen profession. In occupied France, the average life expectancy of a clandestine radio operator was exactly 6 weeks. They were the most hunted individuals in the Third Reich. A saboteur could blow up a train and run away. A radio operator had to sit completely still, broadcasting a signal that the enemy could literally see on a screen. Suzanne listened to the statistics. She mastered her radio. And in early 1944, she volunteered to be dropped behind enemy lines. The infiltration was terrifying. Dropped into the dark countryside of France, Suzanne had to immediately bury her parachute and haul her equipment to a safe house. The radio, concealed in a battered civilian suitcase, weighed over 30 pounds. It was backbreaking work, made infinitely more dangerous by the constant random checks by the German military police at train stations and roadblocks. If a soldier opened her suitcase and found the complex array of dials, vacuum tubes, and quartz crystals, she would be subjected to immediate, agonizing torture, followed by a bullet to the back of the neck. Suzanne operated under the code names Susie, Leroy, and Lemesel. She moved constantly. A pianist could never transmit from the same location twice. Her life became a terrifying routine of logistical nightmares. She had to find high ground, an attic or a top-floor apartment, to string up a 70-foot copper aerial wire. She had to tap into the local power grid, often causing the lights in the entire building to dim when she pressed the transmission key. Every transmission was a high-stakes duel with the German intelligence services. The Abwehr and the Gestapo had established a highly sophisticated network of listening posts across France. The moment Suzanne pressed her key, German receivers in Paris would pick up the signal. They would instantly deploy the Gonio vans. These vans navigated the streets, their roof-mounted antennas rotating, seeking the strongest signal. When 3 vans crossed their directional bearings on a map, they had a terrifyingly precise location. They would throw cordons around city blocks, kick down doors, and search every room until they found the operator. This brings us back to the freezing Parisian attic in April 1944. The stopwatch ticks past 14 minutes. Suzanne is sweating despite the freezing rain outside. Her right hand is cramping from the rapid, rhythmic striking of the Morse key. She knows her fist, the unique individual rhythm of her tapping, is recognized by the operator in London. It is her only proof of life, her only proof that she hasn't been captured and forced to transmit under Gestapo control. 15 minutes. The roar of a heavy engine echoes from the street below. The squeal of brakes cuts through the sound of the rain. The Gonio van has stopped. German soldiers are shouting in the stairwell of the apartment building. Heavy boots are sprinting up the wooden steps. Suzanne sends the final sequence of letters. She taps out AR, end of message. She rips the headphones from her ears. She does not panic. Panic is a luxury she cannot afford. She grabs her one-time pad ciphers and throws them into a small iron bucket, tossing a lit match inside. The highly flammable paper vaporizes in seconds. She violently unplugs the radio, severing the connection to the aerial. She slams the lid of the suitcase shut. The footsteps are on the floor right below her. She grabs the heavy suitcase, throws open the skylight, and pulls herself out onto the slick, rain-swept zinc roof of Paris. The door to the attic explodes inward, shattered by the butts of German MP-40 submachine guns. For months, Suzanne Mertzizen played this deadly game of hide-and-seek. She transmitted coordinates for parachute drops, reported on German troop movements, and coordinated the actions of thousands of Maki fighters preparing for the D-Day landings. But a network is only as strong as its weakest link. In the brutal, paranoid world of the underground, betrayal was the ultimate currency. In late April 1944, the Gestapo closed the net. Through a compromised contact, the German secret police ambushed Suzanne. She was arrested alongside her fellow Merlinettes, Marie-Louise Clorec and Pierrette Louin. She was dragged to the infamous Fresnes prison on the outskirts of Paris. The Gestapo interrogators knew exactly who they had caught. They knew she was a pianist. They wanted her ciphers. They wanted her frequencies. They wanted her to turn her radio back on and feed false information to the Allies, a deadly counterintelligence game known as the Funkspiel, radio play. They subjected Suzanne to barbaric torture. They utilized sleep deprivation, beatings, and waterboarding. They promised her a comfortable life if she would just send one message. Suzanne looked at her captors and gave them absolute deafening silence. She did not break. She protected the transmission codes with her life, rendering her captured radio completely useless to the German war machine. Frustrated and realizing she would never betray her comrades, the Gestapo classified her as a Nacht- und Nebel, night and fog prisoner. She was condemned to vanish without a trace. In August 1944, as the Allied armies were fighting their way towards Paris, the Germans hastily emptied their prisons. Suzanne, along with her fellow Merlinettes, was thrown into a suffocating cattle car and deported to the Ravensbrück concentration camp in northern Germany. Ravensbrück was a specialized hell designed exclusively for women. It was an industrial complex of starvation, slave labor, and medical experimentation. When Suzanne arrived, she was stripped of her civilian clothes and given a striped uniform. She was no longer a soldier of the French Republic. She was a number. But even in the deepest abyss of the camp, the Merlinettes maintained their military bearing. They supported the weaker prisoners. They shared their microscopic rations of bread. They refused to let the SS guards strip them of their dignity. By late 1944, the camp was severely overcrowded and ravaged by typhus. The Third Reich was visibly collapsing. The Soviet Red Army was advancing from the east, and the Americans were pushing from the west. The camp commandant, Fritz Surin, received orders from Berlin to eliminate the specialized political prisoners. The Gestapo did not want highly trained intelligence operatives surviving to testify about war crimes. On the afternoon of January 18, 1945, the loudspeakers crackled across the freezing Appellplatz, roll call square. The numbers of the four Merlinettes were called out: Suzanne Mertzizen, Eugénie Gendy, Pierrette Louin, and Marie-Louise Cloarec. They were ordered to report to the camp office. The other prisoners watched them go. The women of the resistance knew exactly what this summons meant. The camp register simply marked them as transport without destination, the bureaucratic euphemism for execution. Suzanne Mertzizen was 25 years old. Historical accounts and testimonies from camp survivors indicate that the four French soldiers were marched out of the camp towards the execution wall near the crematorium. They were not broken. They walked with their heads held high. They had fought their war, and they had won their silent battles in the interrogation rooms. They were executed by the SS. Their bodies were immediately burned, their ashes scattering in the freezing German wind. They were murdered just months before the camp was liberated by the Red Army. They never saw the final victory they had sacrificed everything to achieve. When the war ended, Europe was desperate to rebuild and forget the horror. The stories of the resistance were often heavily romanticized, focusing heavily on the men who carried the submachine guns and led the ambushes, the women who fought the silent, terrifying war of the intellect. The radio operators, the cryptographers, the couriers were frequently marginalized in the historical narrative. The French military, having briefly allowed women to wear the uniform, quickly pushed them back into civilian life. For decades, the name Suzanne Mertzizen was known only to a small circle of surviving intelligence officers and historians. But truth, like a radio signal, eventually breaks through the static. In the years that followed, Suzanne was posthumously recognized for her staggering bravery. She was declared Mort pour la France and awarded the Croix de Guerre, the Médaille de la Résistance, and the Chevalier of the Légion d'honneur. Her name was carved into the cold stone of the Tempsford Memorial in England, honoring the women who jumped into the dark to set Europe ablaze. Suzanne Mertzizen's story forces us to look beyond the battlefield explosions. Her weapon was not a rifle. It was a brass key and a terrifying intellect. She fought a war of immense psychological isolation. Every time she sat in a freezing attic and turned on her radio, she knew she was inviting a death squad to her door. She had to possess a level of cold, calculated courage that is almost impossible to comprehend. She was the invisible thread connecting a conquered nation to its liberation, and when the enemy finally caught her, she chose to die rather than cut that thread. The next time you see a history of the Second World War, remember the women who operated in the shadows. Remember the pianists who played a deadly symphony under the noses of the Gestapo. If Suzanne's story of iron-willed defiance moved you today, please consider leaving a like on this video to help us share her legacy with the world. Subscribe to the channel to discover more profound, untold stories of the women who changed the course of history from the shadows. Tell us in the comments what part of her specialized warfare fascinated you the most, and thank you for helping us ensure that her sacrifice is never forgotten.